Hello and welcome to our short tutorial, Writing in the Real World. Today we're talking about complex sentences. We're going to have a look at an opinion piece that was written by Maeve Higgins in 2017. It's called Admit It, Summer's Terrible. I'm just going to briefly show you that where you can find it in the New York Times. And we are going to pull some sentences from there where you can see actual complex sentences in the real world. Let's get started. So here is the article, excuse me, Out in the Wild. We can see we've got great images, and as we scroll down, it's not that long of an article. Now, what I did when I was looking for complex sentences, I thought, we'll probably have at least one comma. So I did a search for the commas and then went looking. Now, this is not an exhaustive example of all of the complex sentences in here. I've just selected a few. So one of them, here we go, in need of answers. So I'm going to look here. So here we go. In need of answers, and you can enjoy reading the article on your own. I can put the link in the chat. Let me just do that now so that you can go and have a look at that article. If you're on Facebook, it looks like it may or may not be showing. There we go. So in need of answers, comma, I called the city's Department of Parks and Recreation to speak with the boss there, Commissioner Mitchell J. Silver. So why is this a complex sentence? So we need at least one independent clause, something that can stand on its own, and then at least one dependent clause. So here, I called the city's Department of Parks and Recreation to speak with the boss there. We could have that as a sentence on its own. I'm going to say that is an independent clause. It can stand on its own. However, this in need of answers, that can't stand on its own. It needs something else. And this Commissioner Mitchell J. Silver, also a dependent clause, can't stand on its own. So there we go. There's our first complex sentence out in the wild in this article. Let's look for another one. And I am jumping around a little bit here on purpose. Here we go. And just like that, the summer rage blooms within me once more. So you can see sometimes complex sentences are long and have many dependent clauses, and sometimes they're shorter. So we have this, the summer rage blooms within me once more. That could be independent, that could stand on its own. And then we have a dependent clause, and just like that, it can't stand on its own. It needs something else. So that's why it is with that independent clause. Let's look at another one. And this one starts with, you know something. Here we go. So this is somebody is speaking here. And speaking of hearts, he also mentions that parks are the best date spots. Okay, now here is our complex sentence that we're looking at. You know something, if you take someone to Central Park and walk down that mall, they'll fall in love within a matter of 5 minutes. So we've got a couple of things going on here. You know something. Okay, well, that's a dependent clause. It can't stand on its own. Then we have, if you take someone to Central Park and walk down that mall, It's not a complete thought. It's a dependent clause. So now we've got two dependent clauses. So this one better be an independent clause. Let's see. They'll fall in love within a matter of 5 minutes. So there we have a complete thought, which is your independent clause. So this complex sentence has two dependent clauses and one independent clause. Let's look at another one. We have 5 in total. So 2 more. Here we go. Or, well, maybe I have 3. 3 more. Let's see here. We're certainly living. So I'm just going to search here. We're certainly, there we go. So we're certainly living on an urban heat island, one that seems to shimmer and expand during the long, sweltering days. So let's see what we have here between the commas. We're certainly living on an urban heat island. Okay, that could stand on its own. I'm going to say that's a independent clause. It's a complete thought. Now, what about the next thing here? One that seems to shimmer and expand during the long, sweltering days. Now, the second comma is just, it's separating a list. So that's not separating clauses necessarily. So one that seems to shimmer and expand during the long, sweltering days, that is a dependent clause. It can't stand on its own. So there we have another complex sentence. Let's look at another one. This is the body I find myself in. Let's see. This is the body. Here we go. This is the body I find myself in, right here. This is the body I find myself in. Pale as the moon, heavy as the soil after rainfall. The only one I have to get me through to September. Am I making you curious about this opinion piece yet? Do you want to read it? I've taken snippets, some of these complex sentences, but we haven't looked at the whole piece. And so I encourage you to read it. And as you do, you'll start to become aware of, oh, look, complex sentences, sometimes they're a short independent clause and a short dependent clause. Sometimes there's multiple dependent clauses. There's sort of a variety. It's not just, it looks exactly like this. But if you can recognize them, then when you're doing your own writing, not during the drafting, but during the revision part of the writing process, you can go through your sentences and see, oh, do I have an independent clause? Do I have at least one dependent clause? Okay, I have a complex sentence. And then you can make sure that you've constructed your sentences correctly. So it helps you recognize that. All right, this is the body I find myself in. Okay, that's a complete idea. What about this? Pale as the moon. Dependent clause. Heavy as the soil after rainfall. Dependent. The only one I have to get me through till September. So lots of dependent clauses preceded by this independent clause. Let's look at another one. I fold the brim of my hat. Here we go, last one. I fold the brim of my hat for a second and look up, nodding to my old foe. So we want at least one independent clause that can stand on its own, and at least one dependent clause. Think of it as dependent clause like children. They depend on the parents, whereas the parents are independent. So I fold the brim of my hat for a second and look up. That will stand on its own. And then the author has added something to that, but it depends on the rest of the sentence. Nodding to my old foe. There we have our dependent clause. So I encourage you to have a look at this article. Again, I'll go up here so you can see it. Admit it, summer's terrible, and go on a hunt for these complex sentences, and then write your own. Look at a piece of your writing as you go to revise, because revision is writing. We just get the draft so we can get our ideas on the page, and then the real writing, real work of writing happens. And then go through and see, where do you have complex sentences? Could you improve your complex sentences? Could you add a dependent clause to draw it out? It will help with the rhythm and flow of your writing. But until next time, keep on writing and have a look for those complex sentences out in the wild and check for writing in the real world.